The apartheid is an Afrikaans word which means separateness. It was a word used to describe the rule of white minority in South Africa over its other inhabitants. The apartheid was a system of racial segregation the government of South Africa, the Nationals, had in place for over 50 years, but its roots extended even farther back than that. The apartheid was aimed to protect the dominance of whites over non-whites. During the colonization of South Africa between the Dutch-descendant Afrikaners and the British, the native South Africans were put aside. The apartheid was officially made law in 1948 by the Afrikaners National Party and was a continuation of injustices that were already happening. There were over 148 different apartheid laws in place, including having to carry ID at all times, strict curfews, separate facilities from whites, and interracial marriage was forbidden. The apartheid separated all races into four main categories, which is whites, blacks, Indians, and colored, which was just mixed race. Everyone living in South Africa was separated into different residential areas. Blacks were divided into 10 different homelands based on tribal groups. These residential areas were rural, overcrowded, and lacked jobs. The only jobs available were migrant jobs, and it could be said that the apartheid was also economically motivated, as cheap, expendable workforce was needed to mine the country's gold.
And it has become very clear that the past system in South Africa is the basis of forced and cheap labor.
On page 303 in the Song of Solomon, there is a reference to slavery where it states, "O Solomon, don't leave me here, cotton balls to choke me," which relates to the working conditions the South Africans had to face. Non-whites weren't considered full citizens and did not have the right to vote. The education system was also divided, with black residential areas only receiving a fraction of the money that white schools would receive for education. Mandatory education ended at the age of 13 and was designed to force black people into migrant jobs. Resistance to the laws existed and was often done by young people, but the protesting was just met with oppression. Groups such as the African National Congress stood against the apartheid system, with leaders such as Nelson Mandela who advocated for armed resistance.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and nonviolence.
Mandela's idea of it being futile to protest nonviolently relates back to Qatar's reasons for joining the 7 days. On page 159, Qatar states, "No love, no love. Didn't you hear me? What I'm doing ain't about hating white people. It's about loving us. About loving you. My whole life is love." The ANC chose civil disobedience as their form of fighting back against the laws in place against them, with the goal of political reconciliation and to avoid the loss of life. Unfortunately, even peaceful protests were met with extreme forms of oppression, such as the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, where police killed 69 peaceful protesters. This provoked Mandela to co-found the ANC's militant league called the Spear of the Nation, where in 1961 they bombed power stations and political offices without killing any civilians. In 1962, Mandela was arrested and charged with sabotage and was faced with the death penalty, but continued to refute the apartheid laws and gave a 3-hour speech during the trial where he ended with a call for democratic and free society. It was during this highly publicized trial where Mandela was finally heard and finally understood. This relates back to the scene on page 278 where Milkman states, "He thought he understood guitar now, really understood him," proving that an understanding and reconciliation can be achieved. Mandela was imprisoned for 27 years and was freed in 1990. In 1994, Mandela became the first black South African president elected democratically, proving that reconciliation is possible and putting an end to the apartheid once and for all. Invictus is a Latin word that means unconquerable, and it is also one of Mandela's favorite poems. The poem states, "It matters not how straight the gate, how charged the punishment the scrolls. I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." This poem is trying to get across the idea that through perseverance, anything can be accomplished, even reconciliation.